Hello and welcome to the Climate Resilience Podcast, brought to you by JBA Consulting. I'm Phil Emonson, and in this podcast series, we unpick some of the complexities, the challenges and the opportunities on the topic of climate resilience with some inspirational thought leaders. Today, I'm joined by Guy Singh-Watson. Guy is the founder of Riverford Organic Farmers, a pioneer of ethical organic farming and one of the UK's most regarded voices on food and farming, landscape and the environment. He's a former BBC Farmer of the Year. Over the past 3 decades, he's transformed not just the way vegetables are grown, but the way people think about what they eat, from field to fork. He's a farmer, entrepreneur, and environmental campaigner who believes passionately in stewardship over exploitation and in building resilient living landscapes that can weather the climate crisis. So today we'll explore his journey from conventional farming to regenerative principles and ask what it really takes to grow food in an age of floods, drought and ecological crisis. And we'll also look at what does resilience truly mean when the land itself is under pressure. Guy, there's the introduction. Welcome to the Climate Resilience Podcast. It's great to have you on.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Super, good stuff. Well, look, let's dive in. Lots of areas I'd like to sort of talk to you about, I suppose, today. But the first theme then is what's it like to be a farmer at a time of climate crisis. So in your career, you would have seen farming practices change quite a bit. What changes have you seen and what impact have these had on landscape and farming?
Well, I mean, climate change has arrived a lot faster than I think many of us expected. And you know, we're impacted by unpredictable, you know, what would have been described as freak weather events, but I don't think they can be anymore really. So, you know, that tends to be intense periods of rainfall, periods of drought, and we're having to adapt our farming practices, you know, to deal with that. And you know, probably the biggest single thing, we're in South Devon, quite steep slopes, up to 25% slopes that we're growing vegetables on, you know, intensively cultivated ground, and the risk of pretty catastrophic soil loss is high. I mean, so high that we have had to take some fields out of production, and we've had to take measures to reduce risks quite a lot, which has added to costs. So it's here. And then, you know, drought, you know, we're having to build more reservoirs, think more carefully about water. You know, you can get so far with looking after soil better and building organic matter and moisture retentiveness, but you know, when if you've had a long period without rain, you know, that'll only get you so far. So I think we're having to adapt quickly, and you know, and I see this with farmers all over the world. I mean, we're lucky in the UK, particularly in the southwest. We have a very kind, mild, you know, and previously fairly predictable climate, but I still think it's a lot easier than, you know, the other area I've experienced in is East Africa, where you see the consequences are, life-threatening.
Yeah. And as we speak, we're just coming to the end of a very warm spell. We've had a pretty dry spring this year. So even I mean, just talking about where we are at the moment, are you finding pressures on the farm at the moment as we speak?
Actually, you won't hear a farmer say this very often, but it's been an absolutely fantastic year. You know, we had a long basically it stopped raining at the end of March, and we had a long dry period which enabled people to prepare the ground, get crops sown in absolutely ideal conditions. And then we've had at Easter we had 75 mil of rain in a week, you know, which nothing too catastrophic in terms of downpours. And then it was dry again, and a few weeks later we had another 2 inches over a couple of days. So basically, you know, it's been a pretty perfect year, I would say, for most farmers. You know, very easy to stay on top of the work and so on. Yeah, so far so good.
So good, yeah, and a lot of sunshine as well, which I'm sure has been helping.
Record levels of sunshine and, you know, long dry periods. So as organic growers, you know, that tends to mean lower disease risks. You know, happy crops and fight off the disease better than, you know, when it's constantly cloudy and wet.
Yeah. This might be a strange question actually so early on in the conversation. I might normally finish with something like this, but given what you've just been talking about in terms of the changing climate and what's ahead of us. It might be quite a gloomy outlook, I suppose, but actually, what gives you hope? Because there are a lot of challenges that farmers face with the uncertainty of the climate. So, what gives you hope?
Um, well, nothing much around the climate. I mean, I'm not people who think, get excited that we'll be able to grow grapes in this country. And well, I mean, I have planted walnuts and hazelnuts and so on. So I suppose that is in
Right.
prediction of climate change. But um, the biggest, I don't think really we don't know what to expect, but we know that there are going to be more extremes and there's going to be more unpredictability. And when it comes to farming, there's nothing good in that, I'm afraid. So, the reality of the situation that we face doesn't give me much hope. Our, wisdom and willingness to deal with the challenges and make the intelligent decisions, when we look at it collectively, whether at a national level or an international level, is, severely lacking. So I don't have much hope there either. I mean, the public give me hope. I mean, but the public, all the research I read, really want to see change, and they are prepared to make some sacrifices for that change, but they desperately need some leadership for that to actually happen. And again, I'm afraid that is lacking. So I think we're being failed by our institutions, really.
So, Guy, you've used the phrase adaptation there a few times, and adaptation goes hand in hand with resilience. We talk about how they are interchangeable a lot at JBA and rely on each other. We can't build resilient, resilient communities or resilient farms or resilient landscapes unless we adapt. And we need to see those adaptations at a policy level, at a leadership level, in a community level as well. And so, in the context of adaptation, then I'm really interested how we can build and create climate resilience landscapes. So, how do you think farms can work together to create benefit and resilience beyond their own individual holding or boundary?
I think it's being able to share best practice, and what is recognized as best practice is definitely evolving. But being able to learn from your neighbours is can help you to be a better farmer, and can help you to be a happier farmer. I think there is a sort of mental resilience as well, that one can be easily dragged down by, especially when you're in the fields on your own a lot, by what's happening and the challenges of farming and the challenges more broadly facing our planet. And I think working together and at least being able to share that is very important. So I did actually found a cooperative, 25 years ago, of organic growers in South Devon, which I think has been, tremendously sort of helpful. And I think probably the actual mutual support is in some ways the most important part of it. And then more recently, I have on the farm where my wife and I live now, we have essentially made it into a collective. So there are about 8 businesses here working quite closely together, working in their own very specialized fields. And I think that works well. I guess more broadly, I mean, clusters, we're being encouraged to form farm clusters to work on things like, catchment sensitive farming and so on. And provide, to produce wildlife corridors. There's a project in our valley to introduce beavers, which is so far, which you have to get everyone on board with. Not everyone is. Some people are quite concerned about it. I've just started a project to put some large wooden turbines up on a ridge. That would be working with a couple of neighbours and actually working with the whole community, and the energy would be sold into a local energy users club, what's not used by Riverford. So yeah, I'm a big fan of working together in all sorts of ways, and I really want to live in a collective world where people cooperate rather than the idea that we're always competing with each other. I don't think has served farmers very well.
Again, collaboration, working together is a very common theme from guests on the podcast. Thinking about this a little bit more. I was listening to your Desert Island Discs episode that you did. It was from a few years ago now. It was 2018, I think, something
Yeah.
like that. But in it, you spoke about how you obviously you're unable to grow tomatoes sort of all year round, and you import them, I think, from Spain.
Yeah.
So in terms of sort of that more international collaboration, different practices, how do you go about that, and what have you learned from more sort of further afield collaboration?
Well, I am a pragmatist. I mean, I would love it if we were all happy to eat, seasonal whatever's in season.
Yeah,
Um, but that's just not going to happen. I mean, we could eat a lot more seasonally than we do, but I just wouldn't have a business if we didn't have tomatoes available at least most of the time. And the season in the UK without using fossil heat in greenhouses, which in most cases means burning fossil fuels, is about 10 weeks if you're lucky, sometimes only
okay.
8. So the rest of the year we are importing from Spain, from Andalusia, for instance, and there are a couple of tomato growers down there who we've been working with for 20 years. And similarly, at the moment, we've got a lot of stone fruit coming in from mostly from northern Spain, actually. So we do have a group of about 30 growers, mostly from Spain and Italy and southern France, who allow us to maintain a reasonable variety of vegetables um, in our boxes um, throughout the year. And that would be very, very difficult, with just a solely UK only policy. And I think it was got over 20 years ago, we did a study with Exeter University and, heated glass to produce long season tomatoes and is just environmental insanity. I mean, even if you are using combined heat and power, it still doesn't stack up. In the case of peppers, it was 10 times more carbon intensive to produce them over a long season in the UK than to import them by truck from south of Spain, for instance. So yeah, we work with those growers to try and come up with the most sensible environmental policy to maintain a reasonable range of vegetables throughout the year. But an absolute key part of that is telling the story to our customers and building their trust in us so that they will support us sometimes if there are problems, or sometimes if we don't have the availability that they would have in a supermarket, or sometimes if we're more expensive, actually, because sometimes to do things in the right way does cost a bit more. And so being able to tell the story around the food in an honest and authentic way, because there is a tremendous amount of bull out there, greenwash, people telling you all
Yeah,
sorts of stuff that just isn't true.
yeah.
That has been a pretty critical part of Riverford's success over the last 35 years. I would say it was absolutely critical to our success and where we are now.
And with, I'm just going to pick up on this theme here because it's one that fascinates me. Um, this idea of storytelling and trust, and actually there is the way in which you tell that story. So everything you've just told me there is probably rooted in data, the science behind it, with Exeter University doing the study. There's probably some quite technical, let's face it, quite dry evidence that sits behind that. It's probably
Yeah,
for the purist. But actually the way that you can tell that story in a way that is relatable and that's passionate for your end user um, goes a long way to then building that trust and that recognition,
yeah.
that brand recognition. How have you gone about that over time? What sort of techniques have you found for storytelling? Oh, it's an interesting
Well,
one.
I mean, a story has to be told in a compelling and reasonably simple way. I mean, I write a
Mm,
newsletter every week. It's 400 words. You have to be pretty concise. You can't give every last caveat and detail within that, but
yeah.
there has to be enough solid information to sort of indicate to our customers that we have actually done the thinking so that they do. And then on our website and various things have been published there, if they want to go deeper, they can do. So if you want to go in and into our website and find out the exact detail of our supply contracts with our customers, you can.
Uh-huh.
Our exact carbon footprint, you can. The exact reason why we use the packaging that we do, you can go and find it there. But a tiny, tiny minority of people are going to actually do that. But I do think it's important that it's there and that you are doing it in an authentic way. Well, it's important just for me personally, actually. I mean, that I see so much greenwashing out there, and I unfortunately, people have very busy lives, and these are very nuanced issues. They're very seldom simple answers. To go back to the heated glass thing, local is best has been the story throughout my adult life, and it's been very difficult. So that was absolutely questioning an intuitive belief that most people have, and we have done that, and we don't sell anything from heated glass. As far as I know, we are the only people to have taken that stance, despite the fact that it's irrefutably environmentally insane. In fact, were you to heat a glass house to 20 degrees centigrade, which is what tomato requires, and you start planting them in January, and it's single glazed. I mean, were you to do that in your home, it would actually be illegal to build that home. It wouldn't building the regs. Yet you have 100% glazed with single glazing, and that's what everyone's doing. And it is complete environmental insanity. Yet people continue to do it. It's even subsidized by our government. I mean, so sometimes it can be a bit, fighting for what is the real truth, which is often not an easy story to tell, can be a bit frustrating. And I'm afraid there are way too many brands out there who just know perfectly well that very few people will go and do the detail. So they will just sell something that just sort of ticks the quick boxes. That phrase, "we're cognitive misers," I'm afraid it is true. So, the whole regenerative thing that's going on at the moment, you used the word earlier.
Yeah,
I almost stopped you because it completely drives me nuts. I mean, regenerative means nothing, unless you're prepared to define in some detail what you mean by the term regenerative. Regenerative as an aspiration, you might say, well, even there, nobody's agreed. I mean, does it include human beings? Is it just the environment? It's a word that means nothing, but is being used to sell some very expensive products and by some very dubious people.
It's so interesting hearing you talk so passionately about this, and this sort of phrase then that's become ubiquitous. It's arguably overused. We are experiencing something similar with the word resilience, because everybody's talking about building resilience to climate change. It is a bit of a buzzword in the sector, but very few are taking the time to say, well, actually, let's just, as you've just said, well, let's just define what this thing actually means. Let's just think, well, because actually, if you think about the word resilience, it means different things to different people, to different organizations, and in different contexts. And actually, I find that really interesting. The fact that we've all this different interpretation of it. And you were talking about mental resilience earlier. The need for mental resilience as a farmer to sort of keep pursuing this during all the many challenges. You've spoken in the past about, and I quote here, agriculture that works with nature, not dominate it. And working with nature-based solutions play a really important role in the way that we think about how the landscape can more naturally support the management of flood risk, for example. So how then, thinking about this term resilience, what does climate resilience look like from a farmer's perspective?
Well, I mean, I haven't actually written a definition, but I would, resilience, were the climate to shift, were it to become 50% wetter, 50% drier, were it to, have intensive periods of rain, that a resilient system is one that could carry on, without too much loss of productivity or loss of soil, or, without, given, and with those changes, one that is completely reliant on it being absolutely as it is, lacks resilience. So, I could talk about, what that means for us practically, if you like. Okay, I will.
Well, no, I was just thinking there that you mentioned the word productivity, and clearly, as a farmer, productivity is so important for you. You are producers. You therefore, I think, need to strike a balance between the responsibility, the stewardship, the custodian of the land, and you
Yeah.
sort of hinted at this earlier, and maintaining that degree of productivity. How do you strike that balance? That must be a really
Well, it is.
interesting. Yeah.
I mean, it is, and in the market-based neoliberal system that I've lived my entire adult life under, there is very little space for someone to take a holistic view. I mean, you have to you as a farmer, and probably any business, is constantly pressurized to do what is profitable and what's profitable in the short term. And for farming, you've absolutely got to be thinking in the long term. I mean, if you're thinking about your soil, building a stable structure with high percolation rates so you don't get runoff, and if you do, that you've got good crumb structure on the surface, that the aggregates don't break down and get washed away and so on. So, in order to do that, you have to really look after your soil. You have to, add organic matter, not cultivate in the wrong conditions, cultivate it as little as possible, probably. Maybe think about how you're cropping it. We're on my farm, we're going to really trying to grow as many perennial crops as possible. I think that's a big challenge. I see when I go to East Africa, there are many more, staple starchy perennials than we have in our temperate latitude. So it is more challenging. But I think trying to move from a system of agriculture that requires creating a seedbed every year, which is inherently incredibly vulnerable, you're just stripping off all the protective layers of, vegetation and leaving it bare and subject to whatever the weather throws at it. That is something that is always going to be risky, and particularly risky on our steep slopes. So trying to move away from that, reduce the amount of cultivation, try and grow as many perennial crops as you can, try and keep the areas as small as possible. So if water does start moving, it hasn't got, our worst soil loss happened in a field where we had a 400 meters from the top to the bottom. Didn't lose much at the top, but by it got to the bottom, in 20-minute thunderstorm, we lost an inch of soil, and it was taken millennia to generate, probably. So just trying to make sure that it is, if the freak things happen, that the soil will stay in the field. I can't remember, Phil, have I answered your question? I rambled on a bit there.
I think you have. I think, well, there was sort of two interwoven questions, to be fair. I think we had that question about what resilience is, and I think you've certainly answered that for sure. And then the sort of second part of that was, I suppose, how you strike that balance between being a custodian of the land and being a producer. And I think what you're just talking about there, about taking the long-term view, I think that's really interesting.
You're inevitably making compromises. I mean, businesses, farms are businesses. We have to, if we can't make a profit, we're not going to be here for very long. And trying to temper the need for profit with a need to be, long-term custodians is a very difficult thing to do. I mean, there are farmers who are just interested in the money and really don't care, but I think they are the minority. And I think most farmers, given a bit of encouragement and a bit of commercial space, would, want to be good custodians of their land.
Guy, we've covered so much in the last half hour. It's been a really super conversation, a really honest conversation, and I've really enjoyed going down little avenues that I perhaps didn't expect. The role of storytelling and trust, and how you engage with your customer base, which was really interesting. Guy, really appreciate your time, and thank you for coming on the podcast. And so we've reached the end of our time today. As always, if you've enjoyed listening, then please hit the subscribe button so you're ready for the next episode when it lands in a month's time. Till then, thanks for joining us. I'm Phil Emonson, and you've been listening to the Climate Resilience Podcast, brought to you by JBA Consulting.